Guys, it's Tina and I am back and I'm here with another highly requested video. It's for my updated foundation swatches and matches. And the original video I did quite a while back and a lot of people seem to find it helpful. So I'm here with an updated version, so it's version 2.0 and it's showcasing my current foundation collection and all the shade matches that I have found. And some of the shades are a lot off, so I do have to mix them with other shades to get a good match. But there are a few shades that match my skin perfectly and they are the perfect shade match for me. Now with foundation, it's tricky to tell what my skin tone is on camera because of lighting and different camera quality and adjustments. So for reference, I typically go for NC44, NC45 from MAC. That's my typical shade range. And a lot of people do use MAC as a reference point, so that's why I'm using it. But in other brands, I tend to go for the tan deep or the golden shades. Shades with names like golden, tan, sand, amber, pecan. Those golden undertones, that's what I typically gravitate towards. And even though I tend to be more of a yellow golden undertone, sometimes the best matches for me have a neutral undertone, and you'll find that to be true with a lot of people. If you don't know whether you're warm or cool, go towards a neutral undertone, which is neither pink or yellow. It is mostly in the neutral zone. It may be a little bit peachy, but that is going to be your best bet. A neutral undertone will match the majority of skin tones. And then some foundations just lean way too warm and just start looking orangey on my skin, or they lean way too cool and look very pink and red on my skin. So I stay away from those. I try to find a middle ground for my skin tone because of my undertones and how my skin kind of reacts with different foundations. And a lot of problems that I run into with brands that tend to have a limited shade range, I am the darkest shade or the second to darkest shade, or I tend to have to mix a couple of shades to get a great color match. So if you have trouble like I do and you are similar to my skin tone, maybe this foundation swatch video will help you in selecting your shade or figuring out the closest shade to your match. And for reference, I have oily skin and I tend to go for matte foundations or foundations that are better suited for oily skin, so they'll be oil free or oil controlling. So keep that in mind. I'm also going to mention some of my favorite foundations. Now I know a lot of people are like, what's your favorite? What's your all-time favorite? And it's like picking among your children. Like, there's so many that I really love depending on the occasion, the season, what I feel like. If I want to go for full coverage, light coverage, am I just going out to run errands? Am I going out for a date night? It depends on the occasion. My foundation selection is going to change, and I have a variety because foundations are my thing. I love foundations so much and I love trying out different ones. So if you want to see a video of my top probably 10 or 15 foundations, because there are a lot, I can definitely do that for you. But if you want to go ahead and see my foundation swatches and matches, then stay tuned and I'll talk to you soon. This is the MAC Studio Fix Fluid Foundation, and this is the shade NC44. NC44 is lighter than my skin, as you can see, but it has a great yellow undertone and it doesn't oxidize on me. So I will use this but darken it up with my powder foundation or my setting powder and a bronzer. Here we have the MAC Pro Longwear Nourishing Waterproof Foundation, and this shade is NC45. The NC45 in the Pro Longwear Foundation does lean very dark orange on my skin, and it's not a very good match on my skin tone, to be honest. It just throws everything off and it looks a little bit too dark on my skin. I also have the MAC Studio Waterweight Foundation, and my shade here is NC45. The Studio Waterweight NC45 shade, though, is a little bit more forgiving. I can use this, and because it is lightweight, it does blend in better with my skin, but I do have to be careful with this one when it oxidizes as well, because it can look too dark on my skin. This is the MAC Matchmaster Shade Intelligence Compact in the shade 7.0, and I also have the shade 6.0. The Matchmaster shade number 6.0 actually does look pretty nice on my skin. It blends in pretty nicely, It is a little bit more of a neutral golden undertone, so it matches my skin a lot better. The 7.0 shade is very orange, like it looks so orange on my skin. It looks like an Oompa Loompa shade, and it's a very bad match for my skin. So I wouldn't recommend this if you're NC45 or NC44. Now for a brand that makes some of my favorite foundations, Marc Jacobs. The first up is the Marvelous Mousse Transformative Foundation. This is the shade 82 Cocoa. Number 82 Cocoa has more of a neutral olivey undertone. This is actually a pretty decent match on my skin, believe it or not. It matches my face and my neck pretty well. And then we have the Marc Jacobs Genius Gel Supercharged Foundation. And for this, my shade is 82 Cocoa Light. 82 Cocoa Light is actually a really good match on my skin as well. It has a more golden olivey undertone and it blends in nicely with my skin. I really like this shade as well. Next up, we have the Marc Jacobs Remarkable Full Cover Foundation Concentrate. This is the shade 82 Cocoa Light. And then I also have the shade 84 Cocoa Medium. I have the shade 82 Cocoa Light and 84 Cocoa Medium. These are two drastically different shades, but I got the two because I mix both to get my perfect match. I find that the 82 Cocoa Light can come off a little bit too ashy around my mouth in places where I have dark pigmentation. So I mix the two shades to get a warmer tone that matches my skin a lot better. So the shades of Marc Jacobs, they tend to be a little bit different. They need some tweaking. I do think they need to expand their range in the darker realm, but so far these shades work out decently for my skin tone. Then we have the Makeup Forever Ultra HD Invisible Cover Foundation. This is the new formulation. And they sent me a few of the shades. So I have 175, which is R510. Then we have the shade 178, which is Y535. And last up is the shade R520. Now the three shades that I got from the Ultra HD collection that were sent to me are pretty deep. As you can see on my skin, they just don't match. This is the R520 shade, this is the 175, and this is 178. And the best match I found is the 175, because the 173, I did order that and it was just way too ashen on my skin. It just did not look good and it made me hate the foundation until I tried the 175 shade. It was a little bit too dark and I do have to only wear it when I have a tan on my skin, but the foundation actually worked out pretty well and it looked pretty good on my skin. So I'd rather go a little bit darker, try to lighten it up with powder and make it look decent on my skin, then go lighter and look ashy. I also have the Makeup Forever Ultra HD Invisible Cover Stick Foundation, and the shade I have in this is 173, which is Y445. 173 in the Ultra HD Stick Foundation though is a beautiful match on my skin. It blends in seamlessly. It's a great shade match and I love the formulation of this stick. And then my favorite formula from Makeup Forever is the Matte Velvet Plus and the shade 70. As you can see, it's more of a neutrally tone and it is a great match as well. Some of these matches that you'll see on my skin, you're like, how do they work if they're so drastically different? You'd be surprised how well this blends into my skin as well. Now let's go ahead and talk about Dior. I have the Diorskin Nude Air Nude Healthy Glow Ultra Fluid Serum Foundation with Sunscreen. Talk about a long name. And I have two shades for this. I have number 40 and number 50. Shade number 40 is just way too light on my skin and a little bit too beigey. And then we have shade 50, which is way too dark, way too orange. And it's like, wait a minute, that escalated quickly from 40 to 50. That's the difference in shade match. It makes no sense. These higher end foundations just, they skip out on darker shades. And I mean, the two darkest shades are these two. Are you kidding me? But anyway, I love the formula, so I will bear with it. I mix these two together to get a pretty nice shade match. And because the formula is so liquidy, they mix pretty well together. I also have the Diorskin Nude Skin Glowing Makeup, and the shade I have for this is 41. The shade number 41 is a pretty caramelly yellow undertone foundation. I actually really like the finish of this one. I do have to deepen it up a little bit for it to work for my skin, but I really like the finish of this foundation. Next I have the Diorskin Star Studio Makeup Spectacular Brightening Weightless Perfection Foundation. Another long name with a lot of claims. The shade I have here is 50. The Star Foundation in the shade 50 is way too deep for my skin tone, but I also love the finish of this. And if I mix it with shade 41 from the Nude Skin, it actually mixes pretty well together and leaves a really great finish. So I really like these two mixed together again. And it's a shame that I have to do that. But this is a problem that we typically run into with some of these higher end foundations. Although they're trying to catch up with the game, it's still way behind schedule and they need to catch up really quickly. And then it wouldn't be a Dior foundation collection without the Diorskin Airflash Spray Foundation. And my shade here is 600. Shade number 600 for the Diorskin Airflash. This one, it takes a little bit of work. It's way too dark. It's a little bit too pinky. So I have to blend it in, I have to use different powders, but the finish is so beautiful and it's really not that obvious on my skin that it's not a perfect shade match. And I really just like the formula of this foundation. Again, I wish they had better shade matches. Now let's talk NARS. I have the Sheer Glow Foundation and my shade is Medium Dark 2 Tahoe. The Sheer Glow formula was one of my favorites for the longest time and I really love the color match as well. This actually blends in really nicely with my skin and leaves a very nice skin-like finish. It is heavy duty though, it's not lightweight, it's not sheer at all as the name suggests. It's really a more medium to full coverage foundation. I also have the NARS Sheer Matte Foundation, which is not a love of many people. And this is also in the shade Medium Dark 2 Tahoe. In the Sheer Matte, the Tahoe shade does come off a touch lighter because it is a matte formula. It's more of a powdery finish. Most people do not like the Sheer Matte. I actually do like the Sheer Matte, but I like it mixed with the Sheer Glow to give me more of a matte finish, believe it or not. So I don't use it on its own necessarily, but I will use it with the Sheer Glow to give a perfect finish. And I really like the formula, but again, it's more heavyweight. It's not a sheer matte as it suggests. Keeping with NARS, I'll show you their Pure Radiant Tinted Moisturizer. This is in the shade Seychelles Medium Dark 2. I tend to stay with the Medium Dark 2 shades in NARS. Now for the tinted moisturizers, this is the Radiant Moisturizer. So it's gonna be more glowy. It's gonna be a true tinted moisturizer. It's meant mainly for dry skin, even normal skin. But for oily skin, don't even bother. I don't know why I got this. It's just a bad choice. And more recently, they debuted the Velvet Matte Skin Tint. And I also got the shade Seychelles in Medium Dark 2. For the Velvet Matte, I really like the finish of this. It can come off a little bit too orangey, so I have to be careful with this. When it oxidizes, I do have to set it with a lighter yellow tone powder. But the finish is beautiful. If you want a really lightweight foundation, this is a really good one. It's a tinted moisturizer. Again, it just gives a tint to the skin, but it's really lightweight. It feels great, and it actually gives a decent coverage as well without being overwhelming. This is the Giorgio Armani Maestro Fusion Makeup, and this first shade is number 9, and I also have shade number 10. Giorgio Armani Maestro was one of my favorite foundations. I need to get back into this, especially for the summertime. It's such a lightweight, matte, beautiful finish. It's a really great foundation for oily skin. Shade number 10 is a little darker, a little bit more golden. This one I wear when I have a tan in the summertime, so it's perfect for that. And when I'm in between shades, I just mix the two. Number 9 is a little bit more pinky neutral, so I have to be careful with that. But number 10 is great for my tan months. I also have the Giorgio Armani Luminous Silk Foundation in shade number 10. This is a struggle foundation for me. I really got it because of the YouTube and Instagram hype. Luminous Silk, it's so perfect, to get it. And I don't know where I'm going with my oily skin with this glowy foundation. It is far too glowy, far too oily for my skin. It is a struggle foundation for real. I would have to really mattify this guy with a primer or mix it with a matte foundation. It's just a real struggle for me to use it. I avoid it like the plague. Not for oily skin at all. How about some Chanel? This is the Perfection Lumière Long Wear Flawless Fluid Makeup. And the shade here is 54 Beige Ambrè. Did you panic yet seeing this really light yellowy foundation on my skin? It's a bad color match. It is really bad. Again, high-end foundations just, I don't know why they can't get it right, especially for Chanel, which is so expensive. They should really get this right. This shade is not good at all, and it tends to lean a little bit orange. I can blend it in with my skin, don't get me wrong, but then as it oxidizes, it turns a little bit orangey. So not the best match. I also have the Chanel Perfection Lumière Velvet Smooth Effect Makeup, and the shade here is 70 Beige. Where I got beige from, I don't know. And then their beige shade in the tint is a little bit more forgiving, but as you can see, it's a lot pinky on my skin, so I do have to bronze and set it with a golden powder to really offset the pinky undertones. This is a struggle foundation as well. I really should have returned it, but I didn't, so you're seeing it here in the swatches. Next we have the Becca Matte Skin Shine Proof Foundation in the shade Tobacco. Tobacco in the matte skin foundation is such a beautiful shade match for me. It's the perfect level of neutral and golden. It blends in so nicely with my skin and has a nice matte finish. It's really one of my favorite summer foundations. Here we have one of the Becca foundations. This is the Aqua Luminous Perfecting Foundation, and the shade is Warm Honey. The Aqua Luminous foundation is new to the Becca lineup. It is not for oily girls at all. I really don't like this foundation. It's a struggle foundation. It's a little bit too glowy, too liquidy. It's just too shimmery and shiny on my skin. All right, it doesn't shimmer, but it glows and I look like an oil slick. So skip this one if you have oily skin. I also have the Hourglass Veil Fluid Makeup, which is also oil-free. And this shade again is number 6, Sable. The Sable shade from the Veil line is a nice shade for me. Actually, it has a very neutral undertone, as you can see. It blends in pretty nicely with my skin. I don't love this foundation, but I don't hate it either. I think the shade may skew my decision a little bit. It doesn't really match well with my skin, and I can't find a great match. So I can't really enjoy the foundation because of the shade selection. Here we have the Hourglass Immaculate Liquid Powder Foundation, which is said to be mattifying and oil-free. And the shade I have is Sable. The Immaculate foundation, again, the shade selection just leaves me wanting more. And it does dry to this powdery finish, which can be troublesome to blend out and really make it look good on your skin, especially if you have any dry patches. And sometimes I do have dry patches and it just clings to them and it doesn't have the best texture. I don't know, I don't have a real love relationship with the Hourglass foundations. I'm still trying to navigate my way through them and figure out if there's one that I can fall in love with. I have one YSL foundation. This is the Touche Éclat Radiance Awakening Foundation. And the shade I have here is B70 Mocha. This YSL foundation is a real step up from the original Touche Éclat foundation, which was just way too oily and greasy for my oily skin. Now, a lot of drier skin people have been complaining that the formula change is just really terrible for them. But for us oily skin girls, if you wanted to try Touche Éclat, now is the time to try the new formulation. This shade actually matches pretty decently. I do have to tweak it a little bit with powders just to make sure it blends in really nice, but I like the formulation. I'm not in love with it per se, but I do like the formulation. Here we have one of my recent loves. This is the Laura Mercier Candleglow Soft Luminous Foundation. And the shade I have for this guy is Pecan. This one is a recent favorite of mine. It's so gorgeous. It just sits really well on the skin. It's not matte, but it's not glowy and dewy. It just gives a really soft skin-like glow to the skin. It's just really beautiful, and I love the shade match. This is one of my better shade matches. It really blends in flawlessly with my skin. So if you're looking for a foundation to try out, you're not looking for an all matte foundation, this Candleglow Soft Luminous Foundation is one to check out from Laura Mercier. Let's venture into Lancôme, the Lancôme Teint Miracle Foundation, and this shade is 450 Suede C. The Teint Miracle Foundation, this shade is a little bit too dark for my skin and a little bit too, I don't know, a little bit too warm as well. It's a little bit orangey, so I do have to mix it with a lighter foundation, but I do love the finish of this and the long wear effect. It's really great for oily skin. The Teint Idole Ultra 24-Hour Foundation, and this shade here is 460 Suede W. The Suede, the 450 Suede W is actually a nice match for my skin. It's interesting how they go warm and cool. This one's a lot more yellow. If I mix the two, I get a decent balance, and the finish of both of them work well together as well. I also like the finish of this foundation. Then this is a newer formulation from Lancome. It's a Teint Idole Ultra Makeup Stick, and the shade I have here is 450 Suede N. The 450 Suede N shade is the best match I've gotten from a Lancome foundation, and I think that is my perfect shade. It's a neutral undertone, so it blends in really well with my skin. Even though I lean a little bit more yellow, neutral foundations tend to suit me pretty decently. So I really like the shade match, and I really like the formula. The Lancome foundations, I just have really good luck with their formulation. So if you have oily skin, they're one to check out. How about some Tom Ford? This is the Tom Ford Traceless Foundation, and the shade I have for this guy is 09 Toffee. This Tom Ford foundation really should have been a return. It's just a formula that I can't get into. It's very light, it's very sheer, it doesn't blend in with my skin, it's a bad shade match. I just don't like the formula, and the shade match just makes it even worse. So this is a skip for me. I have the Bobbi Brown Natural Finish Long Lasting Foundation. This is in the shade Golden 6. The Bobbi Brown foundations tend to lean a little bit more yellow, so if you have a strong yellow undertone, Bobbi Brown is one to check out for you. I didn't fall in love with this foundation. I don't hate it. I don't like it that much. It's just a regular everyday foundation. I don't see that it's that great of a formula to pay that price. I also have a single Black Up foundation. This is the Mattifying Fluid Foundation, and the shade I found to match me best is 05. Holy Orange Batman, yes, this Black Up foundation shade is intense. It's crazy looking on my skin when you see it that thickly applied, but this is the best shade match that I got. I did order the sample set, so if you wanted to try a Black Up foundation, get the little packets of sample foundations. It's about $3. It's a selection of shades. I think it's 3 or 4 shades in the formula that you want, and that way you can get the best shade match for you. This is the one that I chose. It actually blends in pretty decently with my skin. I wouldn't say it's a perfect match, but it's the best one, and I do really like this formula. It is oil-free, and it's a great mattifying formula. So it's one to check out if you have oily skin, but just be mindful of the shade match because it goes 0 to 100 real quick. Now let's talk about Tarte Cosmetics, which has very limited foundation shades. I have their newest foundation, the Rainforest of the Sea Water Foundation, and the 2 shades I have are the 2 deepest shades, and the shades are Tan Sand and Deep Honey. This is Tan Sand and this is Deep Honey. As you can see, it's just ridiculous, these shade ranges. This is the deepest shade in the range, and I have to mix the two to get a pretty decent shade match. This one is way too beige, this one is a lot orange. As you can see how Oompa Loompa it looks on my arm. Mixing them together, I get a pretty decent in-between shade, which is fine for me, but for deeper skin tones, you're not gonna find a shade in this collection. I also have the Tarte Empowered Hybrid Gel Foundation, and again, I have the 2 deepest shade, which are Tan Sand and Deep Sand. This shade is Tan Sand and this one is Deep Sand, and they're different shades. This one is Deep Honey in the Aqua Foundation, this one is Deep Sand. Now, they're a little bit different in undertone. As you can see, this one is a lot orange, but this one is a little bit more deep golden, and the mix is a little bit better for me. I don't get as orange, but the light shade, the Tan Sand, is way too light, and these are the 2 deeper shades, and you see the drastic shade difference. I mean, this is second to this. Imagine that. So again, I think the shades need to be worked on a lot, and you know what? I'm tired of brands avoiding making deeper shades. It takes a little bit more work and research because of the nuances of making dark foundations, but I think it's worth the investment. Instead of sending people on numerous trips around the world, maybe invest in making better shades for deeper skin tones. Next, I have the Smashbox Studio Skin 15-Hour Wear Foundation. The shade is 4.1. Now, the shade 4.1 is deeper than my skin tone, and it can lean a little bit too orange, so I'm very careful with this shade. I would use it to mix. The formula is decent. I do like the formula, the finish, and the long wear of the foundation, but the shade range leaves a little bit to be desired as well. They do go a little bit deeper, but it's hard to find a match for my undertones. And I also have the Smashbox Camera Ready BB Water, and I got the shade Medium Dark. This BB Water actually has a decent skin tone match for me, and it goes on pretty decently. I just didn't fall in love with it. I do have to give it another shot though, but if you're looking for a very lightweight, watery foundation with a very light coverage, this may be one to check out. This one's also a little bit different. It's a BB cream, but in a liquid form. It's the Acne Solutions from Clinique, and the shade I have is Deep. Now this guy is one of my babies. It looks a little bit too orangey on my skin, but it blends in so nicely on my skin, and it has like this very light matte finish. It's beautiful and it feels good on the skin, but there are only, I think, 3 or 4 shades in this. So if you don't find a shade match, you're just SOL. But if you do get a match in this, it is really nice on the skin. It's great for oily skin. It's great for the summertime because it's lightweight, and it is forgiving in the shade. So try it out. This is one that I recommend trying out. I really love this. I haven't talked about it much, but it is one of my favorite just liquidy BB type lightweight foundations. And this one's a little bit different. It's not technically a foundation. It's the Cover FX Custom Cover Drops, which are meant to mix with different skincare products to customize coverage, or you can mix it in with your foundations to change coverage or change the color. The shade I chose after a lot of shade swatching is G80. This was such a struggle product for me. I changed the shade about 4 or 5 times. I was trying really hard to like this product because a lot of people were raving about it. I tried so hard to find a good color match. It just doesn't really work that well for me. If you're gonna use it directly as a foundation, or you're gonna mix it in with another foundation, then it works out pretty decently because you're mixing pigment with pigment. But if you're gonna mix it with a primer like they suggest doing, then your shade is gonna be off because it's gonna lighten when you mix it with other products. And I mean, even clear products like primers that dry clear, it still lightens up, and I just had the hardest time finding a color that would be good for mixing as well as using on its own or mixing with foundations. It was just a struggle bus for me, and I don't see what the hype is. Apart from using it alone, I don't see what the hype is about mixing it with like a primer or with a moisturizer. It doesn't work for me because the shade is just thrown off by it. But if you mix it with a foundation, which I don't know why I would need to do that, I'd just buy a full coverage foundation if I was looking for more coverage. I don't get the hype. I just don't get the hype of this foundation. These next ones are deluxe samples, but I thought I would show them to you anyway. This is the Clinique Chubby in the Nude Foundation Stick. And the shade here is 24 Gargantuan Golden. Whoa. This Chubby in the Nude foundation seems to be one that I would try out with a good shade match, but I'm going to try this shade to see how it works. I have not tried it yet. I did get it as a deluxe sample, but it looks like it's very lightweight, but I'm afraid it might be a little bit too shiny on my skin or dewy. So I'm going to test this guy out and see how I feel and if I want to get a full size. And here we have 2 of the Clinique Beyond Perfecting Foundation Plus Concealer. And the shades here are 21 Cream Caramel and 24 Golden. And then these 2 shades in the Beyond Perfecting Foundation Plus Concealer, I think, are gonna be pretty decent. The shade match in the Cream Caramel seems to be pretty nice, and if anything, I can mix it with the Golden, which seems to be like a nice golden undertone, so I can mix that in and get my perfect shade. Now let's go ahead and jump into some drugstore foundations. I have the CoverGirl Ready Set Gorgeous Fresh Complexion Foundation, and I have 2 shades here, number 310 Classic Tan and 315 Tawny. Here we have the shade 310 Classic Tan, which is a little bit too light and peachy for my skin tone. And then I have the shade 315 Tawny, which is definitely too rich and too deep for my skin tone. But I mix these 2 shades together. Depending on what shade I'm going for, I'll alternate the different amounts I mix. But these 2 together actually give me a pretty good shade match and even a good tone match as well. Then we have the L'Oreal Infallible Pro Matte 24 Hour Foundation. And the shade I have is 110 Cream Cafe. Now number 110 Cream Cafe was the closest match I got in this foundation. The other two shades were either too pink or way too dark, and this shade actually blends in with my skin pretty well. I just have to make sure that I'm mindful to blend it in very well, and also make sure I set everything in place with a matching powder. Here we have the Maybelline Matte and Poreless Fit Me Foundation, and I have two shades for this. I have 330 Toffee and 355 Coconut. The shade 330 Toffee Caramel is actually a pretty decent shade match for my skin, but I still mix in a little bit of the 355 Coconut just to get a decent match. Sometimes this can be a little bit too light, but I love the finish of this and it gives a great coverage as well. Here we have a newer foundation to the drugstore market. This is the Milani Conceal Plus Perfect 2-in-1 Foundation Plus Concealer. And I have three shades here. I have 09 Tan, 11 Amber, and 13 Chestnut. The 09 Tan shade I can find locally in drugstores, but the 11 Amber and 13 Chestnut I did have to order online. Now number 9 Tan is a little bit too light for me. Even though it looks like it would be a good match, it's way too light. So the number 11 Amber shade is actually a pretty decent match again. I do have to adjust the tone a little bit. I can either mix it with the Tan or the Chestnut shade. This Chestnut shade, number 13, is way too dark and it's a little bit too orangey toned. But if I mix just the right amount, I can get a pretty decent shade match from these three. And then the last of my drugstore foundations were sent to me by L'Oreal Paris. This is their True Match Lumi Cushion Buildable Luminous Foundation. I have the shade W5.5, W8, and C8. Here we have the shade W5.5, which is Suntan, which has a yellow undertone. It's a little bit too light for me though. Even though it looks like it blends in with my arm, it's too light for my face. And then we have the shade W8, which is Cream Cafe. And this one actually matches me pretty well, and it does a good job on its own. It leans a little bit more neutral than yellow tone, so it's good for my skin. And the last shade is C8, which is the cocoa shade, and this one is definitely too dark, but it has a little bit of a golden undertone as well, so I can mix it in to get a better shade match. But I do like the coverage of these. It's lightweight and they feel good on the skin, but they give a nice beautiful finish as well. And here are all my drugstore foundations swatched on my arm. Again, I have a couple of good skin matches in this, even though I do have to mix a couple of shades, which is the thing about drugstore foundations. They don't necessarily run very dark, and even if they do, the shades tend to be off. But because of the price point, you tend to be able to afford a couple more shades, so you can mix and match as necessary. This time around, I decided to show you some of my powder foundations, which can be used on their own, but I typically use them to set my foundation. I just use a light layer so it's not caked on. But these powders are remarkable and I love having them in my collection. The first one up is from Urban Decay, and it's my Naked Skin Ultra Definition Powder Foundation in the shade Medium Dark Golden. This Urban Decay powder foundation is one of my favorites. It's such a very smooth formula and it matches my skin pretty nicely. It has a beautiful yellow golden undertone without getting too orangey on my skin. And one of my favorites of all time is the Marc Jacobs Perfection Powder Featherweight Foundation in the shade 500 Fawn Cocoa. It really matches my skin well, and it's a very soft and light powder, so it doesn't add too much coverage when I'm setting my foundation. I also have one here from Becca. It is their Perfect Skin Mineral Powder Foundation in the shade Bamboo. This shade Bamboo from Becca is also a very nice powder, and it's not too yellow or not too orange, so it really matches my skin well, and it really blends nicely over liquid foundation as well. I also have the NARS All Day Luminous Powder Foundation. This is in the shade Medium Dark to Tahoe, which again is my NARS shade. This NARS powder in the shade Tahoe, it's a nice color match, but it gives a very shiny look to the skin, so I don't tend to gravitate towards it much. I prefer a matte finish. This one gives a more luminous finish to the skin. I have the IT Cosmetics Celebration Foundation Illumination in the darkest shade, which is Rich. Again, a brand with a very limited shade range. The IT Cosmetics Luminous Foundation is also a glowy version of a foundation powder. As you can see, it comes off a little bit orangey on my skin, so I have to be very careful if I choose to use this powder. I'd probably use it more as a bronzer around my hairline. We have the Tarte Confidence Creamy Powder Foundation. And again, this is one of the darkest shades. It's the shade Tan Honey. The BB cream from Tarte is very light. It actually matches my skin pretty well. As you can see, it kind of blends into my skin. It's a very lightweight powder, so it actually sets foundation pretty nicely without being cakey, and it has a soft skin-like finish. I also have a couple of powders from Laura Mercier. This is her mineral pressed powder in the shade Warm Chestnut, and this one is a very warm, almost orange toned powder. This Warm Chestnut shade, I don't know what I was thinking, but it's ultra dark on my skin. I would have to use this as a bronzer during the summer months because obviously it's very warm and it's way too dark for my skin. This is the Laura Mercier Smooth Finish Foundation Powder in shade number 17. This shade, the number 17, though, works out a little bit better for my skin, but it's a little bit dark, so I have to reserve it for summer months when I get a little bit more color on my skin. And one of the newest ones to my collection is the Giorgio Armani Luminous Silk Compact Dual Use Powder Foundation. And the shade is number 9. And the Giorgio Armani shade is a nice neutral powder. Again, a very sheer kind of luminous finish, so it sets foundation really well and it doesn't leave a dry powdery finish on the skin. I know it's a little bit difficult to see some of these shade matches on my skin, but again, my two favorites are the NARS powder and the Marc Jacobs powder. And then the other powders, truly, I don't reach for them, but I can incorporate them in my foundation routine as the mood strikes. Here we have my Guerlain Lingerie de Peau Invisible Skin Fusion Foundation. This is shade 24, and this is shade 25. And to wrap up the swatches, we're gonna go in with my favorite foundation because I know I will get asked. The Guerlain Lingerie de Peau is my favorite all-time foundation, even though I have quite a few that come in a close second. My all-around top favorite foundation is the Guerlain Lingerie de Peau. Now, there are many others that I do love. I absolutely love them. But this one I just always gravitate towards, especially for special occasions. It just looks great on my skin. It blends in nicely. It's lightweight. It's comfortable to wear. And it gives me a nice skin-like satin matte finish, which I really enjoy. So here you go. This is my ultimate favorite foundation, even though I have about 10 or so that I absolutely adore as well, and they're very close in second place, and they're all tied for second place. So this is shade number 24, which actually matches me very well when I'm lighter in the winter months or when I don't have a tan. And shade 25 is for my darker periods. I don't use it alone. I mix it in with shade 24 to deepen that up. And that will be the final set of swatches. Alright guys, so hopefully this video was helpful. I know a lot of people are interested in my different foundation matches because they think that they are similar in complexion to me, or they find that they use similar shades to me, so they want to know their shade match in a different brand or a different formula. So hopefully sharing this video with you helped you out, and until my next video, which will be very soon, I'll talk to you. Bye guys.